somebody tells me visualize, I go, why? How does it work? If you ask me to visualize, like, why does it work? Like, why should I invest my time on that versus something else? If you're asking me to use affirmations, like how specifically, why, how does it work? If you're asking me to emotionalize, well, what's happening in me to tell me I need to create these false senses of feelings? I want to know why it works.
And why does it work, especially emotionalizing? I think that's something that people hear a lot. I talk a lot about embodying something, really feeling it.
Yeah.
But why does it work?
Great question. It has to do with circuits in the brain and neurochemicals that are released. And so when we feel something, chances are that we're going to release dopamine in the brain, the feel-good neurochemical that activates the reward center of the brain. And chances are if we feel that and we have this positive emotion around it and that neurochemistry is flooding our brain and our body with feel-good chemicals, we're actually activating the motivational center of the brain. And so when we visualize, when we set a goal, when we take an action step, when we emotionalize, when we read our goals, the initial flood of neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, feel-good chemicals, and then if we share it with a friend, oxytocin, those three neurochemicals, those are the neurochemicals of goal achievement. But then there's the other side of it, the other circuits of fear, of stress, where norepinephrine, cortisol, or epinephrine, stress hormones can be released as well. And so I'm fascinated, and I want to teach people the stuff that we've learned about beliefs, self-esteem, self-worth, fears, and the stuff that really holds people back is all the how to get healthy and stay healthy, we know. How do I build a business and sustain? We know. How do I get into a relationship and make it successful? We know. We know most of the how-to for anything that anybody wants to do in this time frame that we live in. So the how-to is the easiest part of the equation. So the harder part of the equation is, why am I not doing the things that I know I should be doing? And why am I not doing the things that I could find out easily how to do?
Let's talk about that. So in your real estate company, you said, I'm giving everyone the same training, they're reading all of the same books, and yet they're not getting the same results. And it wasn't like, oh, well, the smart people are doing better than the dumb people. You said sometimes it was people that you were like, God, in real life, this guy's not that bright, but he's crushing it. So what ended up being the difference between the people who didn't do anything with the information and those that did?
So this is going back sometimes, I think in 1992, we were stuck, but I knew there was more possibility. There was room for growth. And I wanted to figure out if the stuff that I did in the 80s when I was a kid, that broke free, would it work with some of my agents? And so we took 75 agents, randomly agents said, hey, do you want to get into a 6-month program to retrain your brain, your subconscious brain, around your beliefs about what is possible for you to achieve, around your habits of what you have to do in order to achieve that. And we focused on retraining their subconscious mind. And so for 6 months, they had to go through a process of listening to certain audio tapes, reading certain materials every day, and following the process of training their brain, specifically their subconscious brain, which controls 95 to 98% of all of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors today. And within 6 months, that group increased sales by $100 million.
Jesus.
$100 million. And I said, holy shit, right? This is working. And so we started to teach. Some of what we teach now in NeuroGym, actually now we have the technologies, we have the systems that are far better than what we did back in the 90s. And we went from 1.2 billion to 4.5 billion a year. And it wasn't because we taught them any more skills to be real estate agents. We taught them how to change the way they thought about themselves. We taught them how to change their habits. Our agents who made $750,000 or more were in front of a client 75% of the time. And when we asked all the agents that weren't in front of more clients, why are you doing that? Why aren't you in front of people that are going to help you earn more income? Oh, well, we're busy doing this and doing this and doing this, and they had stories and excuses and reasons why. And so part of the work that I love to do now is really help people understand, what is your story? What's the story you're telling yourself? Because we all have a story. We have a money story, a relationship story, a health story. We have a story for everything. And then that story keeps recreating our lives over and over and over again. And we have beliefs that support the story. We have habits that support the story. We have people that support the story. We have systems that support our story. And so my question that I always ask people, who would you be with a different story? The first source of shame, when I was 5, I moved from Israel, where I was born, to Montreal. And I had just started kindergarten in Israel. And then I was thrown into a class with 50 kids in Montreal in grade 1. I didn't speak English or French. And so I felt stupid. I felt like I sat there, looking up at the ceilings, bugging the other kids, and was consistently reprimanded, consistently put in the principal's office. And then I was consistently, brought, to my knees with my parents. My father was physically abusive, which, is challenging in itself, because words weren't a way, that he communicated. Hands and feet were his way of communicating. And so when I did the wrong things, that was the punishment. And so I felt embarrassed that I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't going to amount to much. And back then, school was, my parents were trying to say, go to school, do well. That's your way out of, where we were living. That's your way out of this life that we're having, which wasn't a bad life. We had food on the table, we had a roof over our heads, but there was always a struggle.
You've become this really extraordinary example of rewriting your story. How did you get out from under the story that you would have had to have been forming if your father was abusive? I know a lot of people are watching this right now. They are stuck in a story, man. Like something happened to them as kids or whatever's happening to them now. They don't know how to get out from under that story and could never conceive of having a beautiful relationship, that they've re-explored and reimagined.
Yeah. When I was in my 20s, one of the things that Alan put me on a path to was personal development. Read a book a month, go to events, listen to cassette tapes back then of motivational stuff for motivation, for inspiration, for strategies, for tactics of what to do to raise your level of skill and knowledge. So I went to this event and I brought up this challenge that I had with my father. And the instructor said, when are you going to forgive him? I said, never. I'm never going to forgive him. Forgive him. There's so much pain. And the instructor said, well, if you're never going to forgive him, then you're the one taking the poison pill, hoping he's going to die or he's going to be affected. He says, you don't forgive him for him. You forgive him so you can move on. And I was like, aha, number one. And then he said, why don't you ask your father why he did it? Why was he like that? And so when I mustered up enough courage on the phone with my father, I said, Dad, how come you've never said I love you? He says, well, my father never said he loved me. That's not what a man says. But you say it to my sister. He says, well, it's okay to say it to a girl or to a woman. He said, why did you hit me so much? Why did you? He says, because you were being a bad boy. I said, but why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you just talk? And he says, well, because my father hit me too. I had to put you in your place. I had to teach you the right way to stop the behavior. And it was at that moment that I realized he just didn't know better. That's what he learned, was the process to try and help me. It took 3 years. I used to call him every week. I started telling him, I love you, Dad. Hang up. I love you, Dad. Hang up. I love you, Dad. Hang up. Then one day he says to me, I love you too, boy. And then he has never not said I love you to me, my brother, or my sister since then. On my epitaphs, he lived, he loved, he gave. I always thought that there's a way that I could somehow use my life in a way that I can make somebody else's life a little bit easier to live, either through knowledge, understanding, or love, or process. Then my life's so fun, how to make a difference. I'm one of the people that doesn't believe that there's anything wrong in the world. Everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Many things not to my taste that I don't understand. But I just want to make the journey as good as I can for as many people as